Have you ever worried that your precious family stories, the ones that make the history yours? Try that again. Have you ever worried that your precious family stories, the ones that make your history yours, might fade away, especially when caring for someone with dementia? Those memories are even more precious and sadly more vulnerable. Okay, I got to do this one more time. Have you ever worried that your precious stories, the ones that make your history yours, might fade away, especially when caring for someone with dementia? Those memories are even more precious and sadly more vulnerable. This week, we're talking about how those stories, one more time. Have you ever worried that your precious family stories, the ones that make your history yours, might fade away, especially when caring for someone with dementia? Those memories become even more precious and sadly more vulnerable. This week, we're talking about how to capture those stories before they're lost, preserving the voices and experiences of the people we love. Stay tuned for practical tips and inspiring ideas to help you safeguard your family's legacy. Welcome back, Fading Memories listeners. This is Jen Fink, your host of the Fading Memories podcast. And this week, I've got something unique. I think it's unique. One of the things that happens with families who have multiple generations of memory loss from Alzheimer's, vascular dementia, like my family, is there's a lot of family history that's just gone. And with me today is Andrew Hall. He's with a company called No Story Lost. And he is going to talk to us about what his company does and also how we can preserve some of that family history. So you're not in the same boat as me wondering, who is this picture of? So thanks for joining me, Andrew.
Yeah, happy to be here. And you said you wanted me to introduce myself, so you didn't mangle my name or mispronounce anything, but you nailed it. So we're off to a great start. But yeah, like you said, I run No Story Lost, and we help families preserve their life stories. So the way we do that is we interview a storyteller, so that might be a parent or grandparent, and then we gather up those interviews, transcribe them, write a beautiful manuscript, add photos, add favorite colors, and then turn that into a beautiful coffee table book. So that, like you said, when you've got some relative flipping through that someday, they'll know exactly who that long lost relative is, and they'll have the story behind everybody.
I may have to do that with my dad's trip to Africa and how he was instrumental in creating a library in the village where they were doing um, cataract surgeries and dental treatments.
Hmm.
Many people that listen regularly might remember that my paternal grandmother was a head librarian at the local school district, and she took on this project of creating this library absolutely 100%, totally passionately. She went to Friends of the Library sales, thrift stores, garage sales, you name it. If she was at a red light and you put your book down at the bus stop, she was like, I need this for the books for the library in Africa.
Yeah.
The catalyst behind that was to get the dental equipment to this this country in Africa, which I'm not good with geography, so it's on the western part of the continent. They had to have a shipping container, and it didn't matter how full or empty the container was; it was still one price, and that was the
And
catalyst
you
for
said she
starting.
filled the container, isn't that
She
right?
did, and I do have a recording. She was 102 and a half, and I asked her about that whole like her part in it, and I recorded it on my phone. I have a lapel mic that I plugged it in, so her voice is loud and clear, and I learned things I didn't know, and so I'm very grateful that I have that story. And when we were doing our get to know you chat, I told you about also trying to get her to tell me stories about when my dad was a kid. I happened to be talking to her in October, so I was asking questions about Halloween, and I didn't really get any good stories. So, do you have tips for maybe helping draw some of these family stories out? I mean, obviously, it wasn't something that she felt real passionately about. So she was that's it
Yeah.
it reflected in her response.
Yeah, interesting. Well, first of all, remind me after the call, and we'll get that interview transcribed for you about the library, because that's no problem. But I think you hit on something there where, like, if you ask the questions about things that people were passionate about, you're going to get a completely different story, like all the detail around that library mission or library challenge versus, you know what, maybe she wasn't a Halloween person. So we have to be ready that people might have more detailed memories about certain things than others. And I think our interviewers are really good at feeling that out over the first interview or two and knowing that, for example, we've interviewed a few engineers, so they're going to be like gearheads. They're going to know the details and specifications of things. And if you ask them, how they felt at the grade 7 dance, they might not have an answer for you. But there might be a different person that you interview who isn't going to even know the brand of car they drove any time in their life. But man, they're going to have an incredible memory of Halloween, for example, if that was their passion. So I do think you got to pick and choose the types of questions for the given storyteller. But also, we have found some fun and interesting ways to get more creative with asking questions than simply like, what do you remember about being 7? You might not have a great answer to a really generic question like that, but my team asks some fun, interesting questions in different ways, such as like, think of the house that you grew up in and like what did it smell like? Or what kind of like sounds were in the neighborhood? If you stepped outside when you were a kid, what would you have seen, smelled, heard, neighbors, people, feelings, all those sorts of things. So sometimes the way that you frame the question can elicit a completely different response, which is fun.
It's interesting that you pull in like sights and smells and hearing. I do a lot of legislative advocacy for the Alzheimer's Association, and it's an all day thing. And in the morning, they're like, okay, we're going to break you up into teams. And they give you a crash course in telling your story. And last year, after Advocacy Day, which happens to be coming up, a lot of the volunteers like myself were like, hey, we would really like more training on this telling your story. And that's one of the things they really emphasize is to bring in, an atmospheric kind of,
Hmm.
piece. Like, was it a hot day, or, like what, like bring in the
Yeah.
smells because it helps bring people in. So asking that's a really good question. I don't really have too many older family members to ask anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Well, why don't you try it for yourself just for fun? Do you want to pick a childhood place or memory that's significant? And then we'll try to just get a bit more depth to the question.
Well, you were talking about um like
Even
childhood
just your
home.
childhood home or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we moved into a brand new house in 1970. And one of the
Cool.
things I do remember, and this is interesting since I already talked about her, was walking across the newly paved street, or the
Yeah.
paved new street, on a 2x4 across the street to the kindergarten part of the elementary school with my paternal grandmother. So when we came out of the house, you're going to hear school noise, school kid noises, cars, because, the street was right there. We had dogs, so there might have been dogs barking, although they weren't real barkers. My mom liked to bake, so there would always be some cookies or brownies or something.
Nice.
uh,
Yeah.
so that's actually I'm
You're
gonna
really
dwell
painting
on
the
those.
picture already.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you
Um,
say something about a 2x4, like crossing the street on it? What were you saying
yeah.
about a two
So
by four?
the street was brand new, so they had just laid
Yeah.
down the asphalt and I guess the
Yeah.
slurry seal. I'm not an engineer
So you
type, so
couldn't step in it yet. Yeah.
no, I think it would have been sticky. So we
Yeah.
like, you know, balance beamed across this newly paved road street to the schoolyard, which I find
Hmm.
interesting that the school was there before the street. Um,
Yeah.
and I might have to like go into the Google search and see if I can figure out when that school was established, because
Yeah.
there was parts of the neighborhood that were older. This section was, how they built it in,
Right.
pieces. So,
Yeah.
and it was also a time
But
when
that's,
interest rates jacked up, and my parents
Oh
almost didn't
yeah.
buy the house. So the parts they finished, they did it out of order because people,
Hmm.
the whole shopping experience of buying a house changed. So,
Yeah.
you know, I always laugh
It's
because people are always like, "Oh my God, interest rates are 7%." My first mortgage was 9.
yeah. Yeah,
So
and there's stories, I don't know about in California, but in the early 80s, there's stories from our parents who were like they were 15% or something like that. So
yeah, my parents bought their house in 1970 and we sold it after my mom passed away in 2020. So they never dealt with that, thank God. But yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
I had friends whose parents had mortgages that were like, well, old credit card rates, not new, not
Yeah.
nowadays. So yeah,
Right.
it's just interesting that people think 7% is just outrageous.
Hmm. But that was fun. It'd be interesting for me to just keep asking questions about like your childhood there. But you see how it's not just like, oh, where did you live? And you could give a quick answer to that and we could move on. Or we could dive deeper and, hear about the backyard and hear about the other kids in the neighborhood. And already, as soon as you started answering, you had like these intricate details about the crossing the street on the 2x4 and the smells and stuff. So it's pretty fun if you kind of go that one level deeper. So it's pretty common for families to think like, oh yeah, I know grandpa's story about living in Nelson growing up. This is how our whole project started, was doing my grandpa's book. And so it's got like some black and white pages and early photos in it. And so a lot of these stories everybody knows, but when you take the time to sit down and ask the next level deeper of question rather than just the one you might ask over Christmas dinner or something, with an interviewer who's dedicated completely to asking questions, that's when you get these extra details that you've never heard before, which is fun.
And now you're making me wish that some of my grandparents were still alive. So my maternal grandfather was a chef in the army during World War II, and he
Mm,
never left stateside because his
okay.
trigger finger was damaged. He trigger warning people. He used a hat, damaged it with woodworking and kind of with a saw, not an electric saw,
Yeah.
hand saw. Didn't
Yeah.
stop him from hunting or any of those things, but it kept him stateside during World War II. And my grandfather was like an amazing chef, cook person. He could open the
Yeah.
fridge. My grandmother would be like, "There's nothing here for lunch," and he'd open it up and turn whatever was in there into a great meal. And I would love to know the story about how he damaged his finger,
Hmm.
but he's been
Or about
gone.
how he started cooking. Like, what was his earliest memory of cooking something? Who taught him?
Because I think his family had a bakery. Oh my goodness.
Mm,
I'm gonna have to see if I can piece all those parts together because it never clicked. I just know that
yeah.
he was and I think he was a chef for the officers during the war. So obviously he had probably a little bit better ingredients to work with, but it's probably also where he honed the skill of using what you have and taking what you have and turning it into something a little different because not everybody likes leftovers. So yeah, it's
Hmm.
but these are the stories that are, you don't think about when you're, in your early 30s and you think your grandparents are going to be gone around forever and then
Yeah.
grandfather passes away and your grandmother's got vascular dementia and you're trying to figure out what the heck to do and it
Hmm.
gets very challenging. And
Agreed.
it wasn't until after I lost them that it became more important to gather stories from my paternal grandmother. My paternal grandfather died first, so that was hopeless. And I should talk to my uncles because I learned some really interesting stuff at my grandmother's funeral. So,
Mm.
um,
Yeah, and just press record when you do that. You obviously know how to record calls, or if people are in person, they can just use their cell phone and press record. And that's the number one tip I give to everybody is like, not every family is going to like purchase a biography project, but any person who, if you're talking to an older relative, can just voice note on their cell phone these days, and then at least you have it. So that's always the number one tip I give.
and I said uncles, and it just dawned on me that I only have one left on my dad's side of the family because my dad's middle
Mhm.
brother died a year ago.
Yeah.
Like, I better
So there
get
you go.
moving.
Yeah. Yeah, no kidding. Well, this is the trick that we have is that, to your point, everybody thinks they have time. And when it's too late, they would pay 10 times as much to go back and have what they can no longer get. But in the moment when the person's still around, you just think, oh yeah, maybe like next time I see them, and there's no rush to go ahead and take care of it all. So I mean, that's one thing we're trying to figure out is like how to express to families, like to make sure you capture it while you can.
It's definitely more crucial for families like mine that have been dealing with memory
Hmm.
loss for 3 generations. We're stopping there. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And, so we've lost a lot of family history, and neither my so my maternal great grandmother had some form of dementia, and my grandmother and my mom were not really good at documenting. So we had like tons of family photos, but
Mm.
I'm the only one that ever captioned them. You can use a
Right.
Sharpie and write on the back. Don't use a ballpoint pen. Use a
Mhm.
Sharpie, write on the back, put who it is. And one of my favorite stories from when we had our photography studio and our photo lab was a woman that brought in a very old photo album with pictures, many of which were from the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. And all of
Wow.
the pictures had very, they were enough detail. It was like just a little blurb, but it was, this such and
Yeah.
such building or this corner on this street. And, you had a good reference to what the photo was. And then there was one photo in there of the photographer that said, me, of course. Nobody had any idea who me, of course, was.
Wow.
And that's been
But
probably,
there's photography in your family too, it sounds like then.
yes, my dad did
Oh no,
photography.
this was a client who came in to see you then.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But it
yeah,
was
yeah.
just it's a story that stuck with me because the gal that had the photo album. So this was a really old the picture. I mean, obviously the
Yeah.
photos were from 1906, so we're talking this was probably
Incredible.
yeah, they were approaching 100 years old, so we were copying them, preserving them, and we're looking through them, talking about them, and like, oh, who's me, of course. And the gal's like, I have no idea. And it's like, so that's kind of one of my
Yeah.
cautionary tales is to
Right.
when you caption them, don't assume everybody's going to remember your face.
Write the full name down. Yeah.
Yeah, you could put me, of course, and then put your name or put your name somewhere in there. So
Hmm.
obviously it got passed along to the point where whoever that
Yeah.
was got forgotten. So yeah, caption
Hmm.
your photos. As a retired portrait photographer back when digital became, like that was it was what's the word fully, it everybody was jumping on the bandwagon. There was a debate like what's the best way to store your digital files. Do you use gold CDs, gold DVDs, all these different
Mm.
things, and the consensus from the professional photography industry came down to the best way to preserve your photos is to print them.
Right.
So I'm sort of still guilty about that. I'm probably better than a lot of people though. I only have one child, so it's like how many freaking scrapbooks and memory books does she need? I've got more than she
Yeah.
wants.
So do you still print all your photos or
Not
most of
all
your
of them,
photos?
but I do print a lot.
Print a lot. Yeah.
And
Nice.
I have some that like from different advocacy, like people send me pictures, and I'm like, I need to figure out how to like display these.
Yeah. Well, aside from just whatever is deemed the safest or the most reliable, it's also the most consumable because you never sit around a laptop together and click through photos, really. It's the one that's out on your coffee table or on your bookshelf that you might actually go through over the holidays or something.
I have three, what are they, 30 by 40s frames in the entryway of our house, which is it's kind of
Oh,
funky.
nice.
Um, the frames are empty
Oh,
because it's very difficult for me to decide what I want to print that big. So I have one photo, I want like
yeah.
travel photos. So I have one photo from um Glacier National Park that I want to print. So it's like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
well now I need two more, one horizontal and a second vertical.
Hmm.
One of these days I'll put the pictures in there and people will be like, "Oh my god, there's photos in here."
Yeah. Yeah, they'll find it strange that they are just empty frames anymore.
It's architectural because
Yeah,
you can just see through them, and so it's almost like picture frame molding on the wall. It
right.
works,
Do
but
you
it
have
is
an all-time favorite photo that you took in your career?
um no. One of the most recent ones was we were at our local lighted Christmas parade. and a
Hmm.
friend brought his son who was, I think, like 6 or 7, and a lot of the floats that went by were blowing bubbles, and so the bubbles were lit by the street lights and the lights going on. And I learned over 25 plus years how to tell a story in one shot. I just love it. It's not my kid, but it's like it captures the feeling of the event.
Yeah,
It's not like
nice.
here's another big truck with lights on it and here's some people on bikes, which is my bike club. And
Yeah,
that's interesting, but the one that stops you and says, "Hey, what's the story behind this?" is those are the ones that people like. So,
nice.
and I have
Yeah.
a lot of those of dogs.
Nice. Well, dogs carry a lot of emotion.
That is true, especially when there's food involved. So how did you this I know No Story Lost is relatively new. How did that come about? We don't need to keep talking about my family history here.
It's about 5 years old, and the roots started a little bit longer ago than that. But I mentioned my grandfather's book, and he was like the storyteller, patriarch, song singer in our family. And I think I mentioned this when you and I chatted a couple weeks ago, but we would always go for family dinners or see the whole family, 14 or 15 of us, and every couple months we'd hear somebody in the family say, "Oh yeah, someone's got to capture Pop's stories. We got to write these down." And then inevitably nobody did anything about it. And we kept hearing that year after year when we were kids. And then I came back to my hometown in my 20s and heard it again. And I was like, okay, someone's got to do something about this. Like I've been hearing this for 20 years now. So finally I sat down with my laptop out and asked him a bunch of questions and just started typing. And he loved to just go off on rambling stories. So it was pretty easy to keep him talking. But I quickly learned that typing while someone was talking was not the way to capture stories the best. So the next time we recorded the interview, which was great for a few reasons. It's a lot easier to just chat with someone with the recording on, but also you get to capture their voice too, which is valuable to look back on now. And then we transcribed those and kind of wrote the story. So, like I said, this is kind of the first version before we had a company, before we had a name. But yeah, like just amazing, similarly, almost 100-year-old photos too. And this one's really short, just because we were kind of figuring the process out as we got going. And then once we finished it, we had a friend who wanted to get their grandparents' story done as well. So we did that. And then they kind of just snowballed from there. And I did it part-time for a little while, transitioning from our previous company. And then now we're full-time. So the books have changed a lot now, but we've got like a full, more like an 8 by 10 coffee table style book. And yeah, full color, which is nice. So we'll see like big color spreads and then these full quotes, which are like some of the funner stories in the books.
That is a
We'll put those
picture
on.
from the 80s.
Yeah, you can tell immediately, can't you?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I
yeah.
graduated 20 or 41 years ago this year, which is hard to imagine because I can't be that old.
Yeah, impossible.
Yeah. And so yeah, I graduated in 84 and that picture looks smack right in the middle of the 80s.
Yeah, maybe it's the same grad year. So yeah, a couple changes that we made as we kind of turned it into a business. We're making it this bigger style so it would sit out on a coffee table instead of being filed away on your bookshelf. And with those pull quotes and pictures, it's like easy to flip through and enjoy a page or two at a time, as opposed to feeling like it's a novel you have to read. So I think that makes it more shareable if you have guests over or family members over. But yeah, it was just one of those business stories that happened really naturally from us solving our own problem first and then realizing it was valuable to others and then putting all the pieces together to make it happen.
I love the passive aggressive. Somebody or we should do XYZ. Somebody
Yeah.
should
Yeah,
record
yeah, yeah.
Pop's story of like, and now that everybody was mentally looking around the table going, we
Yeah,
should.
exactly.
Who is we?
Yeah. Yeah. Which single one of us is we?
Yeah, that's like the me, of course. I love that. All families seem to operate that way. It's kind of funny, but
Hmm.
it's nice that you finally jumped on that bandwagon because, we've got videos and photos in our phones and stuff. And I'm wondering, what's going to happen with all those when, somebody dies. Like
Hmm.
my dad passed away. I don't even know where the hell his phone went. I guess it went back to AT&T. But he didn't use his phone for photos and stuff. So I never
Hmm.
even looked. Now I'm thinking, dang,
Yeah.
that was dumb.
Hmm. And yeah, if you don't really know what you're doing with your cell phone and you're not backing it up properly, then it's like you said, it's less reliable than old school print the photos and write on the back of them.
Yep.
And I'm not sure that everybody out there is doing proper backups of their phone. So
No, all mine goes to the cloud, so it's shared. What's on my phone is also on my desktop computer.
yeah,
It does
that's
take a
bigger.
little bit of time for them to transfer. It's not like immediate,
Hmm.
which frustrates me because sometimes that's what I want. But I make sure to to save. Sometimes I'll pull them out of Apple Photos and put them into a Dropbox folder in case it's
Yeah,
something I really really want to keep, like photos of my mom and stuff I've done that with. But
yeah.
that kind of leads me to, if somebody is caring for like a spouse or maybe a parent that's in the early stages and they're hearing us talk about this and they're like, oh, I really should do that. Where should they start? If they can't afford to start with you, where should they start with their own, maybe get started, and
Hmm.
then they can call up on you guys. Where's a
Yeah.
good place to start? Like I had the great story with the African Village Library, but then kind of bombed out on other questions that were recommended, air quotes for the
Right.
people who aren't watching YouTube.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good point. I mean, maybe we can take away from our earlier conversation, like start with passion, start with something they're going to definitely want to talk about. Because some people, some clients of ours get a bit of a initial resistance or hesitancy to sit down and tell their stories. It's sort of a big, it can be held as this like big monumental thing, like, oh, I have to like pull together a memoir now, like that's not me kind of thing. So if you make the mountain too big to start with, then I think people can get intimidated. So instead, if you just say, hey, I'd love to get that story of the time you were building the library in Africa recorded just so we always have it, and start with something they'd love to tell the story of, then maybe they'd build the muscle a little bit and get comfortable recording, and then you can get the next one and kind of go from there. Um, and then I'd love your thoughts on this because we're more into the realm of your expertise. But I found for my grandma, who we never had her diagnosed with anything, but certainly she was having memory loss. She, for a long time, she could tell the really old stories better than she could tell, a few weeks ago. So I don't know if it would make sense to start with like the more recent past or start really, really far back. And then we got to a point where I knew that like there was a story she loved to tell, and she probably told me 5 times. And I asked her to tell it on recording eventually, and she couldn't really put it together anymore. And it was a story about the 1930s or 40s, so I can't blame her too much. But what are your thoughts on like
I think if they're in
when
the
and how to structure?
yeah, I
Yeah.
think if they're in the earlier stages, it might be beneficial to get like more recent history. So
Hmm.
I knew in the mid to late 90s that my mom was having memory issues. So it might have been beneficial to go back to like my wedding, graduation, like stuff that was 10, 15 years. I don't think it was that far back, but
Yeah.
I have to do math.
Yeah. I
Uh,
gotcha.
and then get those recorded or on paper or however you want to do it before those memories starts getting really holy, because my
Hmm.
mom got to the point where the quote experts always talk about reminiscence therapy, which is good, but you have to know where they're at in their mind, and I had a really hard time
Hmm.
getting there with my mom. And I there was one day I would take my mom to the park or wherever to watch kids. And this one particular day, um, I had come back from a conference, got trapped in the Denver airport. That's a whole other story. And I was tired, and I knew that because I was tired and it would make be getting frustrated and stressed with my mom easier. I'm like, we're just going to stay in the memory care community. They had a beautiful courtyard. It was a gorgeous September day. Brought some chocolatey snacks. And it happened to be my anniversary. So I brought my wedding album. She didn't recognize herself. She didn't recognize anybody. She just
Mm.
recognized that it was a wedding. And I'd already gone through a similar event where it was a scrapbook of my sister and I, and my sister and I don't look anything alike. And so I kind of figured she would, remember, okay, well, we don't remember the, 1989. Maybe we'll remember the 70s. She didn't remember that either.
Hmm.
So
Interesting.
I know it was so frustrating because people are like, oh, this is the best kind of engagement, blah, blah, blah. I'm like,
Right.
yeah, well, it wasn't the best engagement for us because she had no idea
Yeah,
what she
it's
was looking at. And it was painful
yeah.
because I was like,
Yeah.
how can she not like I'm standing right here that I kind of look like that kid in the photo. It was like so painful. So I
Right.
would start with more of the recent history and see how you do, and then maybe just keep probing and kind of figure out as the disease progresses, like where are they in their mind? Because I think my mom went back to like her teenage years with a lot of things, and it
Hmm.
might have been beneficial to find out about like her high school years. That's when she met my dad and all that good stuff. So yeah.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
it
you raised another tough point, which is like you kind of said, like, where do they go back to? And our grandma would speak about her husband and like say, "Oh, is he up yet?" But he had passed away like 10 years prior. So it's interesting. There's something laid down there, and that's where she's like mentally gone back to. But that was like 10 years before. But to your point, like, do they go back further and kind of identify with a time that was even further back than that? I don't know. It's not a world I know a ton about.
it's really hard to figure out, and it shifts like, my mom would always walk behind me, and it was very frustrating because she walked just fine, her balance was fine, she didn't need any aids, but she would wring her hands, like hold her hands and wring them and watch her feet, which is a recipe for falling on your face. Doesn't matter if you've
Mm,
got dementia or don't watch your feet when you're walking because that's where you're going to go. Where you're looking is
hmm
likely where you're going to go. And everything I did to try to get her to walk closer to me, next to me, in front of me, it was battle royale. It was just ridiculous. And I'm like, one of these days,
hmm.
this woman is going to face plant in the sidewalk, and I'm going to be the evil person because I didn't let her
Yeah.
catch up. Thankfully, that never happened. But after she passed away, I was talking to a guest who, like, you could see the light bulb go off, and she went, "Wasn't your mom the oldest of four?" I'm like, "Yeah." My aunt, who's the youngest, is 11 years younger, or was 11. I don't know. My aunt's still alive. So my
Yeah.
aunt was the
Yeah.
youngest by 11 years. And she's like, "Yeah, your mom was just keeping an eye on the kids." I'm like, "Well, thanks
Yeah.
for nothing because that doesn't
And
do
that
me any
instinct is
good."
still there. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like just that little tidbit of knowledge. I'm thinking when she's thinking about kids that she's thinking about me and my sister. And she never walked behind us. And we always
Yeah.
kind of walked in a clump. So it's kind of difficult to figure out where they're at. So maybe asking some of these, questions like, I'm trying to think like, I know my mom's high school had a fire. The high school is still there. It's gone through a lot of renovations, but it's like well over 100 years old. So you could have been like,
Hmm.
"Hey, I heard that such and such high school had a fire. Do you remember that?" And see what you get. 'Cause I cannot remember if she was there when it happened or not. It
Right.
happened around her high school times. So asking a question that goes back to their memory, but isn't like super personal might really help. I don't know. I was always,
Yeah. And almost see how it places her or how she places herself in relation to it.
yeah. She
It's
might have
interesting.
said, I don't remember. Oh, I didn't remember any of that.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
would have known, okay, well, we're not in that decade. And then just kind
Yeah.
of probe from there. It helps probably to start doing that earlier. I was doing it with my mom who was already at advanced Alzheimer's. And so I think
Yeah.
I was really struggling because we hadn't tried these methods previous. My dad wasn't the best caregiver, so I
Mm,
was trying to make up for lost time, and I don't I don't know that that was very helpful. It wasn't
right.
helpful for me, but it's worth at least if you see something that triggers like a reaction in them, like a memory, I know of a caregiver is caring for her grandmother, and there's just certain things that her grandmother absolutely loves. And her grandmother is not super verbal anymore, but you might have been able to like, like New Year's Eve might be like grandma's big thing. I don't know if
Mm,
it's this person's big thing. And you might get a sign on New Year's Eve that, hey, this is something that grandma really resonates with. Maybe we can pull out some memories before it's too late. So kind of
right.
I think watching their reaction to things might help you figure out where their passions are, where their memories are still stronger. That's where I would start.
And you just reminded me you're also going to see just better days and worse days. And that goes in a unpredictable cycle. So you might try one day and it might just not be the day for it.
That is very true. You were saying that your grandmother was asking about your grandfather. My mom, it's very common. My mom did the same thing. She thought
Hmm.
I was her best friend. So she would always ask me if her husband knew what we were doing. Did he know we were going to the park? Did he know we were going to the nail salon? And she always asked
Yeah.
it in a snarky tone of voice because they had a challenging relationship. And like I said, he wasn't the best caregiver. So he irritated her and she irritated him. And it
Yeah.
showed. So it was really like, ugh. And I just answered, did he know where we were at? Oh yeah, I saw him at such and such meeting, told him we were going to do blah blah blah, or um yeah, I talked to him, whatever, anything that would make sense. And occasionally I'd be like, oh, I haven't seen him today, but I'm sure he's fine with it, just whatever response was
Whatever it
normal.
diffuses. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it wasn't factual, but it I learned really well. It took me a little while. She would ask me, does my husband know where we're going? Yes, mom. Dad knows where we're going. That didn't answer her question. So she would ask me over and over until one day we were
Yeah.
we were leaving and she asked me that question like 5 or 6 times in 10 minutes. And I thought,
Yeah.
oh, holy hell, I can't do this. I don't remember where we were going, but I put her in the car and I closed the door and I was like, I don't know if I could do this because this one is like killing my brain. And I walked around the
Yeah.
car and I grabbed the door handle to get in, and it was like a lightning bolt hit me in the head. It was like, oh,
Right.
wait, I haven't been answering her question. So I get in. She's like, does my husband know where we're going? Yes. I told him I was taking you to the nail salon. She didn't ask again the rest of the day. I was like,
Interesting.
why did it take me so long to figure that out? She didn't
Huh.
put me together with her husband because she thought I was her best friend. And I figured by saying, yes, mom, dad knows where we're going.
Yeah, wild.
Oh God, like once I figured that out, or at the bolt of lightning hit me, it was like, duh. And that's when I
Hmm.
just, like I said, just started answering the question in a way that her friend would answer the question. So,
Hmm.
and
Well,
then,
hopefully a listener learns that lesson a little easier than you did,
yeah, I do
having to
share that.
stumble through it yourself.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, because I was like, man, do I need to stick her in the trunk? Because I really don't know if I can do that. It was rough. It was like, really, lady, stop asking me this question. And then
Yeah.
once I figured out that I wasn't answering it, it was like, duh. Um,
Yeah.
but now I'm wondering if I could have pulled out memories. Well, does my husband know where we're going? Oh yeah, I told him we are going to the nail salon. What do you remember? Who owned the nail salon that you used to go to, or something like kind of grasping
Yeah,
at
just like
straws here?
catching where her head's at the time, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, see if you can kind of
Yeah.
kind of force a memory to pop out just
Because
by
her brain is on some amount of memories at that time, or she's focusing on something from her memory. So maybe another takeaway is like just go wherever they're at that time and see what you can get from
yeah.
that line of thinking or something.
I've heard that suggestion and I was never good at it. I think it's because one, I was
Mm,
overthinking it. But since she was always asking about quote her husband, it was probably an opportunity, a missed opportunity for me to ask her questions about quote her husband. Where did you meet
hmm.
him? Which I already knew that answer, but maybe I would have gotten more information. It's like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
I saw him at lunch, but he was talking. Isn't it your anniversary or something? Like, where did you guys meet? That would have been
Yeah.
smart questioning. Dang. See,
She might have also given you a different answer, thinking that you're her friend than you're her daughter. Wild.
could have been real interesting. Yeah, they met in high school. I think she was 14 and he was 16.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, they were like sophomore and junior, something like that.
Yeah.
But see, it's like those memories are starting to get foggy with me, and I don't really have anybody to ask to
Hmm.
clarify details. So this is why this is important to, jot it down just for your sake. Like, how old were they and what year was it? And,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah. And I
um,
think the whole like last few minutes we talked about the big takeaways, like just start sooner. Like it'll just save so much headache than trying to use all these strategies to get the most you can when it's kind of on the later side. Like just seeing with my grandma what 4 or 5 years difference would have made is the look would be completely different.
yeah, start early. And people do like to tell you about themselves. That's how
Totally.
you when you're introduced to somebody new, you don't be like, "Oh, hi, my name is Jennifer and I do this," or blah, 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 blah. You talk about yourself. They're going to be like, next. But if
Yeah.
you ask
Yeah.
somebody about, you know, well, you've told me about how starting this business and you've told me about your grandparents, and it's like, because I've asked questions. So if you ask questions of your loved ones,
Hmm.
you're going to, even if the stories are completely bonkers wrong, because you can get some seriously made up stuff when somebody's memory is not good, you're still
Mm.
going to have an enjoyable afternoon or,
Yeah.
whenever. And they're going to feel engaged with you and loved and, all of the positive feelings that help caregivers, you know, maintain the stamina we need to care for somebody. It's so much easier when they feel important and respected and understood. We all want to, we all want people
Hmm.
to understand us, and like,
Yes.
I'm kind of the weirdo, but that's me, and but that doesn't make me like somebody to avoid. I'm just unique, and you need to learn why I'm unique. That kind of
Yeah.
thing. So it does make caregiving easier. And my mom did not like to do things. They always said, like, simplify the hobbies they used to love. Well, woodworking was one she did later in life. I wasn't sure how to simplify that one. But she was also really creative. So I found really simple projects that, as art, you can't really screw it up. And she was always stressing, I'm afraid I'm going to do it wrong. And it was like, lady, you can't do this wrong.
There's no wrong. Yeah.
And it was
You
just,
were saying just how special it is when someone's asking you questions, or like I think if someone asks you a question that means a lot that you've never been asked before, that's such a special feeling. And you were talking also about how nice it is just to be understood and be heard. So I'm also a coach, like a life and business coach, and we have this super interesting thing that when I was first getting into coaching, I heard, which I loved, which was called the lamppost idea. So it says like, hey, as a new coach, you might be worried like, oh, am I going to provide enough value? Am I going to help this person enough? And then the saying goes, if somebody just took an hour out of their week, went out on a walk, walked up to a lamppost and described their problems for an hour, that would be extremely helpful for them. So as a coach, if you can be as useful as a lamppost that nods along, you'll help them out. So don't worry too much. I'm sure you can be more helpful than a lamppost. But to your point, like just being heard, someone listening to you intently for an hour is like a gift a lot of people don't even ever get. So if you can even do that, that's valuable for the person too.
yeah, it kind of goes to person-centered care. It's like making them feel, loved, understood, important, giving them like a bit of a
Hmm.
purpose. You could basically say, hey, the grandkids are working on this project for class, and I'm helping them out by asking you these questions, whatever baloney you need to tell them to get them to talk.
Yeah.
Once you get them going, it's usually not a big deal. Getting them not to repeat, and this is people more in the middle and later stages, getting them not to repeat the same things might be challenging. One of the things, my mom had a repetitive story about, she had dogs all her life. And when she was pregnant with her first, which was me, my paternal grandmother, her mother in law said, now you're going to be getting rid of the dogs, right? I heard that story 5,000 times.
Yeah, yeah.
And it got to the point where it's like, oh God, that story again. And she even told it so much her friend in memory care could recite it, which I was concerned was elder abuse. But I learned when, she always had a tell. She'd take a deep breath. I've had dogs all my life. It's like, oh God, she's going into that story. Whoop, whoop, alert, alert. And so as soon as she said I'd have dogs all my life, I would then jump right in and say, you have? Well, what were their names? And the last time I
Yeah, yeah.
asked her that, she's like, well, we named the first one Misty. That was the last one. And
Huh.
we liked that name so much that we just named them all that, which kind of made me laugh internally because I was like, oh, I don't remember the boy dogs having the name Misty.
Yeah.
Now, this was, like within a year of her passing away. So she was definitely
Hmm.
not working with too many good memories. But one, we were at the dog park. So I knew that story was going to come up. And I figured, what the heck? Ask the question and see what response I get. And at least I got a little bit of an internal chuckle because, yes, she's had dogs all her life. So have I. And we had Misty, and before her was Holly. And then we had Daphne. Then we had Tinker and Trina. And now we're getting back into like early childhood. So it gets a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, Tinker and Trina were the dogs we had when I was like really little until I was 12. So like my whole childhood was those two girl dogs. And then there was Imperial and Pierre, and there's all kinds of stories that I probably should have asked her about even more. I think it was Pierre, could find a ball anywhere. Went to a house with a pond, never been there before. And these were poodles. Jumps in the pond, swims to the bottom, comes up with this gooey tennis ball.
Oh,
Yeah. I was like, how did
cool.
the dog find that? It's not like he's ever been here before. It's not like he knew the ball
Yeah.
was there. It was so very strange. So asking questions that help divert them from the repetitive story is an
Yeah.
opportunity to get new stories, which again,
Yeah.
I also missed, but I
And
tried.
is nice for the caregiver too,
Yeah. It's just,
to break it up a little bit.
yeah, here's something different, even if it's fiction.
Mhm.
Like all the dogs were
Yeah,
named
right.
Misty.
Totally. Nice.
So, where can people find about No Story Lost? I always link the website in the show notes, which will be there. You guys can find that there. But where else?
Yeah.
What else should they know about you guys before we let you go off into the
No,
day?
nostorylost.com is great. That's our main website, and you can link that. And then on Instagram, you'll see, yeah, a little bit more color, some example projects. So that's the same thing. Our handle's just No Story Lost on Instagram.
I'll make sure that's linked as well so people can find it easily and go and look at all of the stuff that you've talked about that they can't see in an audio podcast. You guys can always go look at YouTube if you want. It's slightly more interesting than just audio, but not a whole lot more. I do my best, but there's only so much you can do with Zoom recordings. And I want to thank Andrew for one rearranging his schedule this morning for me because I manhandled my calendar badly this week, and for coming on and giving us some advice on capturing memories and stories and preserving them and giving us a beautiful way to get them printed for to share for future generations.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.